Thick thighs save lives. It's a fundamental truth that we've all been aware of since the dawn of time. However, one particular piece of media that many of us consume is the absolute paragon of this idea, this thought, this methodology through which we live our lives. Wuthering Waves is a video game where you play as Chinese women with huge thighs, and the newest character, Qingxiao, literally changes everything. And today I'm going to be teaching you everything that you need to know about her, from how to play her simplified, all the way to her best teams and build. If you love Wuthering Waves and you love thick thighs, make sure to like the video down below, and with all that being said, my name is Braxophone, but you can call me Brax, and let's talk about Qingxiao. Before I show you anything else, it is imperative that you watch this clip. We are straight up sword surfing in here. Look, they said flight was removed, but I don't believe them, not one bit. I don't believe them at all. You can even hold your space bar to do this. I am so Chinese right now.
Outside of cultivation.
Dude, this is so funny. Outside of cultivation. Of course our hobby is cultivation. Qingxiao's kit is actually very easy to understand if you are the one playing her. However, from just a video standpoint alone, it may be difficult to grasp some of the concepts of what she actually does. With that said, I think she's one of the easiest damage dealers to explain that we've had in recent memory, and she is even easier to play so long as enemies don't move out of your abilities. The first thing to know about Qingxiao is that she is a tune strain damage dealer. This means that instead of Rupture, where you're going to have a big nuke whenever you tune break, she's going to get her damage increased when dealing damage to enemies that have tune strain interfered on. To get tune strain interfered, you have to tune break an enemy while they have tune strain shifting, and luckily her entire kit applies tune strain shifting on literally every one of her damaging skills. But Qingxiao also has another stacking mechanic that interplays with tune strain. Every single time a character in the team inflicts tune strain interfered, she'll put one stack of mind lock on the target, and for every stack that she has, she'll get her damage amplified by 2% with an extra 5% per stack for the first 7 stacks, up to a max of 15. This means at max stacks, she's able to get 65% damage amp, but in addition to that, with one of her passives, she also deals 2% more damage per stack of mind lock with an additional 5% per stack for the first 7 stacks. So with this second passive, she's able to also get an additional 65% damage bonus, meaning at max mind lock, you get 65% amp and 65% damage bonus. Her other passive is going to help her retain those mind lock stacks across multiple enemies in a fight by giving Qingxiao a stack of gathered mind, which basically means when she attacks, she will inflict that many mind lock stacks to the enemy based on the amount of gathered mind stacks that she has, and when anyone in the team defeats an enemy, she will gain the amount of gathered mind stacks equal to the amount of mind lock stacks the enemy had. In the same passive, there's also another effect where she actually inflicts an extra stack of tune strain interfered on the target when someone in the team tune breaks. This is exceptionally helpful for her damage in particular because you actually get a max of 4 tune strain interfered with her best in slot teams, and she's already able to start with 2. So all of these effects are going to be what really increases her damage. Now, to be honest, you don't really have to wonder how you get all of those stacks to max, because the rotation that I show you guys in a bit will maximize her damage in the most limited amount of time possible. But before we get into that, I want to give you a basic rundown of what this character plays like. Qingxiao gives the appearance of a dual forte character where she has 2 different forte bars that you want to build. However, even though she has 2 different stances, both of them interplay with each other very easily to make it so it's easy to max out both of those fortes. Her stances are the sheath stance and the drawn stance. The sheath stance will give Qin heart, and drawn stance will grant sword cadence. Once both of these are full, you'll enter the ephemeral transcendence state, where your basic attack sequence will change and you'll have a special held attack that will dish out a ton of damage. Some of her attacks will be in midair, and some of them will be held attacks, which means that you are going to want a resistance to interruption, but luckily she does get that when you cast her intro skill or heavy attack string blade, which are basically going to make it so that when she gets hit in midair, it's not going to immediately knock her out of her attack, and you can finish the entire combo. Now, her skill is going to be what allows her to switch stances, but she actually has 2 different skills depending on where you're at in your combo. Her skill when you're not mid-combo will give her 45 points of Qin heart, and it has a very long 20-second cooldown. However, whenever you cast her basic attack in any sequence, her skill will be replaced by a secondary skill that puts her in sword flight mode. You'll see how all of these abilities interplay with each other when we get into the rotation section, but the last thing that I want to let you guys know is that her ultimate is actually very simple. It's just going to dish out a lot of damage. So you don't have to worry about using it at any particular time, though there are ideal spots to use it in a rotation. Lastly, her outro skill is going to just dish out a bunch of damage, and her intro skill is going to give her 30 points of sword cadence and a personal buff that will be removed when you use her skill that has the very long 20-second cooldown, giving her an extra 30 points of chin heart. With her intro skill and resonance skill in tandem, you're going to get 75 points of chin heart and an extra 30 points in sword cadence. So overall, this will help you fill her gauges really quickly, and it is absolutely imperative that if you're going to play the lady with the thick thighs, you do need to be learning how to do the thick rotation. So with that said, here's how you actually play her. So normally these... Oh my god, insane voice crack. So normally in these videos, team is going to be a very integral part of the rotation. However, I'm going to go over the teams after the rotation bit because her rotation doesn't change regardless of the teammates that you actually put with her. The important thing about Qingxiao's rotation is, like other Forte characters, if you miss an ability or if your combo gets interrupted, you won't get the full Forte value that you need. And in her case, at least in my experience, there have been many times where an enemy has just moved out of her attacks and the Forte bar hasn't been completely filled. But once you get a feel for this combo, it should be very easy to pull off, and it's honestly pretty intuitive. Essentially, when she enters the field with her intro skill, you're going to use her basic attack combo in midair 3 times. Then when she lands on the ground, you're going to use the basic attacks at 3 and 4. Don't ask me why it works this way. Karo has just been doing that in a lot of their character kits recently. Then once the combo's finished, you're going to use her skill. Now technically, you can use her Resonance Liberation now, or you can use it later. I like to use it right after her skill because it gives us more of a safety net with her energy. After that, use her heavy attack to put her into Ephemeral Transcendence. Use her complete basic attack combo 1, 2, 3, 4 to completely max out that Forte gauge, then hold her heavy attack to dish out tons of damage and outro skill. So her whole rotation is very easy and quick, and simplified, it is intro skill, then basic attack 5 times, 3 in the air and 2 on the ground. Then use her skill, then use her liberation, heavy attack, basic 4 times, then hold her heavy attack and outro skill. Technically, the other place you can put her liberation is at the end of the second heavy attack before you outro skill, and it's completely up to you how you want to do that. Now, as for her main echo, you don't actually have to use it during her rotation. She gets the buffs regardless of whether or not you activate it, and it can actually take up rotation time that you don't want to spend on it because it transforms you into the creature. So you definitely don't have to use the echo in a rotation, and that's why we didn't include it. As mentioned earlier, I do really feel like her rotation is pretty simple, and so long as you can remember that combo, you're going to be dishing out max damage with her, especially with all the mind lock stacks you're going to be able to get. Now, when recording this video, I had multiple times during this rotation where the enemy moved out of my attack, and it basically caused my left bar to not be fully ready to use my enhanced heavy attack. If you're running into a similar problem to this, the best thing you can do is finish up another basic attack sequence to fill it up, or you could jump, skill, and basic attack since your skill becomes basic attack 3 in the air. Ideally, you don't want to have to do that, but if you ever are just a little bit short on the left Forte gauge, those are 2 options that you have. When it comes to teams, I'm actually really happy with all the characters that she can pair with, because a lot of characters in WUWA over time have kind of been secluded to 1 or 2 teams, and Qingxiao actually has quite a few viable options. Now, part of that's due to her just being AERO and there being some really solid AERO buffers, but a large part of it is due to the focus on toon break that so many different characters have had. In particular, her best team at the moment is going to be Mornier, Denya, and Qingxiao. Now, Denya, if you guys remember, has the ability to be in Fusion Burst mode or Toon Strain mode, and in Qingxiao's team, you're definitely going to want her on the Toon Strain mode because your main damage dealer is not a fusion character. Now, Mornier is basically the MVP of all Toon Break modes. She's able to give you 50% Toon Break efficiency, and she responds to Strain, which not a ton of characters in the game are able to do yet. With these 3 characters in tandem, your Strain total damage buff can actually cap at 4 stacks, and reaching those 4 stacks with Mornier is going to be faster, and you're going to get more Toon Break opportunities. Now, Denya is another main contributor to this because she applies Strain shifting as well, and she makes your first break incredibly fast. She has this part of her Forte circuit that makes it so that an enemy target's off-toon level is immediately increased by 50% of the max. While this can only be triggered every 5 minutes, it's able to instantly help you get off a toon break on the enemy towards the start of a fight. Denya also has a huge damage amp for Toon Strain resonators, up to 40%, and she also adds 70% total toon break boost. Her 10 at base, 40 from Mornier being on the team, and 20 more from her Echo set. Many of these same benefits are also going to apply to Lene, So if you don't actually, oh, make sure she's on Toon Strain as well. If you don't have access to Denya, but you do have Lene, this team is going to be probably one of the best options for you, though either one of them is going to work. Now, outside of the Toon Strain shifting characters, you can also play Yuno. Now, it's probably not a huge surprise to you guys because she is useful for a lot of different characters, and she also dishes out quite a bit of damage for being a sub DPS, but she actually gets more valuable if you're not playing Mornier in the team, and instead you are playing someone like Jacona, who's able to amp AERO damage, and if she has her signature, she's able to shred AERO res as well. So these three characters in tandem can also be very strong, though Yuno is just an okay fill if you don't have access to Denya or Lene. Another thing to mention is that the heavy attack amp that Yuno gives Qingxiao doesn't apply to everything in her kit. Qingxiao's damage is actually split roughly 30% between basic attacks, ult, and heavy attacks, but it's slightly more damage on her heavy attacks, which is why Yuno's outro actually is pretty helpful. But overall, this team's value is significantly higher if you have Jacona's signature weapon. If you don't, and you have the other options of playing a Toon Break team, I would highly recommend doing that. But these are pretty much the alternatives that you can play. You also can play Shorekeeper, but losing out on Mornier in any capacity is pretty detrimental to this team, which is another reason why this team is not going to perform as well, even with all the buffs from Jacona and Yuno. Mornier is just too good in Toon Strain teams, even though you can get crit bonuses from Shorekeeper, as well as an extra damage amp too. At this point, the only thing I can hope for is that we get a second Mornier or something, but hopefully some of these different teams gave you a better idea of who you can play her with. And if you want to make the Lene team stronger in particular, make sure you activate her summer skin. It will flashbang all of the enemies and make you do more damage. Now for your Qingxiao build, I want to keep this section as short and sweet as possible because I realized over time that like most WUWA builds are basically just the same thing, but it will go over her best weapon options and her main stats. So obviously Glint of Clouds is going to be her best in slot weapon. It is her signature and it was tailor-made for her. It's going to grant a bunch of AERO damage bonus for inflicting Toon Strain, and it stacks up to 5 times. So you can get up to 56% AERO damage bonus if you're able to apply it fast enough. And once you reach max stacks, that effect gets extended to 30 seconds. On top of that, the AERO damage that she deals will ignore 10% of enemy defense once she's at max stacks with this weapon. So overall, it adds quite a bit of damage to her kit, especially when you compare it to 4-star and free-to-play alternatives. But with that said, that doesn't mean that she's completely cooked if you don't have good weapons for her. Emerald Sentence is Chuyan's weapon, and because of the heavy attack bonus it's able to give, it does end up being an okay secondary weapon, though every weapon after her main weapon is going to be close to 15% worse at a minimum. This applies to Emerald Sentence and Red Spring as well, which is an okay option if you have it, but overall, I'm going to recommend that if you have Emerald of Genesis, you just use this one. At R1, it ends up being roughly 17% worse than her signature weapon, but it's likely also the one weapon that you do have that's going to help her dish out tons of damage. Other than that, if you have Looming Gloss at R5, it can be an okay option, about 25% worse than her signature, though Looming Gloss is going to be a Battle Pass weapon. Feathered Edge is about 5% better than Looming Gloss, however, you're less likely to have it since it is a newer Pioneer podcast weapon. And in a worst case scenario, Commando of Conviction at R5 is about 70% of the total potential of her signature weapon, and it does alright. As for sets, you really want the Heart of Evil Purge set, which is going to give her 10% AERO damage on the 2-piece, but it's also going to make it so that she gets a 20% crit damage and 30% AERO damage bonus when inflicting Toon Strain shifting. This will basically always be up, and the main Echo being a Calamity Effigy will mean that she gets another 10% AERO damage bonus and an extra 10% when she inflicts Toon Strain as well. So in total, this set and this main Echo ends up being roughly 60% AERO damage bonus and 20% crit damage. Now with that said, if you just can't wait to play her, Sierra Gale ends up being pretty solid too, because you do get a total of 40% AERO damage bonus plus whatever you would get from the main Echo. So even though it's not going to be as good as the new set, it can still be pretty solid, and if you have good pieces from back in the day, then a 5-piece Sierra Gale can be pretty solid. For main stats, I highly recommend crit rate or damage depending on the weapon that you're using, but if you're using her signature, you're probably going to want to go with crit damage since her signature is a crit rate weapon. For her 3 costs, you can go double AERO damage as I have here, but also running 1 attack piece works, mostly because she does give herself a ton of damage bonus in her kit. And then for the last 2 1 costs, you want those to be attack as well. So her build is pretty simple, much like other DPS characters in WUWA. And with that said, I do think that Qingxiao is one of the most friendly characters for people that are more casual, since if you just follow the really simple rotation, she dishes out a ton of damage and she doesn't have too many worst case scenarios to think about. With that said though, for those of you who are taking her less casually and want to see what her sequence nodes do, let's go over those too. If you're basically this guy from TikTok,
that Chinese lady is I can't that Chinese woman out. I almost that Chinese.
Here's everything you need to know about her sequences. First off, her sequence 1 is going to increase her crit rate by 16%. This just makes it a little bit easier to hit max, though it's not going to be a game changer for you. It is a lot of crit value though. One important thing it does is it actually increases the max stack limit of Swordlight Ward to be 2, and Swordlight Ward, for those of you who don't remember, is basically what prevents you from getting interrupted. So it gives you way more safety when you're trying to do your entire combo, and hopefully with S1 it's basically impossible to get knocked out of it. It also adds another stacking mechanic to her that just helps increase her overall damage output, but nothing that you need to really change your rotation for. Now S2 is going to be a slightly bigger damage increase because it's going to make it so that her heavy attack String Blade gets a 40% increase to its multiplier. On top of that, Mind Lock is going to be increased to a max of 25 stacks, which is going to massively increase her damage bonus and damage amp that she's able to get from her own debuffs she's applying. She'll also get additional stacks of Mind Lock from her String Blade heavy attack as well. Now her S3 is going to increase the crit damage of a Resonance Liberation by 100%, which is pretty significant, and overall it's going to help her damage out a lot. It's also going to increase the multiplier of the heavy attack that puts you into Ephemeral Transcendence state, which is another pretty solid damage increase, and she'll also inflict 2 stacks of Toon Strain Interfered whenever her Gathered Mind effect applies from her passive. This means that she'll start with 3 stacks instead of just the 2 that we mentioned earlier. Overall, S3 is going to be the biggest damage increase from her sequences all the way up until S6, and you'll see a pretty significant difference in damage. Her S4 is going to make it so that whenever a character in your team activates Toon Strain Shifting, they get a 20% attack increase, and then S5 is going to be a multiplier increase of her skill that's used when she's not using her basic attack sequence, and she's able to fly around longer, which is cool, I guess. Lastly, enemies are going to take 40% more damage from, wow, that's a lot of abilities. Her S6 increases the damage of the extra damage dealt by her S1, and Qingxiao is going to have a stronger response to Toon Strain Interfered. So basically with all these things combined, S6 is going to be your biggest damage jump, then S3, S2, and then S1. By S6, you should be doing over 200% of her initial damage, and overall she becomes very strong. With that said, I definitely recommend getting her weapon before you get sequences because it is going to increase her damage more than her S1 would, and it's going to be better for your pulse, but that's a separate issue entirely. Regardless of whether or not you pull for sequences though, it is completely undeniable that every single player that pulls this character needed to be saved, and thank goodness we're on the same sinking ship together, because these thighs are the ones that I wanted to save my life, and Lucilla's, but that's a separate thing entirely. If you found this video helpful, or if you want your head to be crushed like a watermelon by a Chinese woman in Wuthering Waves,
make sure to subscribe for more.